Hi. Let us now look at assessment criteria 1.2. Let's look at assessment criteria 1.2. So AC 1.2 is also on the environment, and we understand the impact of the microenvironment towards responsibility marketing. So we first start by understanding the concept of stakeholders, because all the stakeholders in a business needs to be defined, and we'll understand the stakeholders that come in the microenvironment, and also the concept of stakeholders and how that will impact on responsible marketing. So these are the indicative criteria. This is what we are going to learn. We're going to look at some of the key stakeholders in the microenvironment: customers, competitors, suppliers, strategic partners. And then we are going to look at a theory. We're going to look at a theory that represents the microenvironment. It's called Michael Porter's 5 forces. Michael Porter's 5 forces. These are the 5 forces. We are going to learn that. And then we are going to understand about ethical labor practices in the microenvironment, ethical supply chain practices, and what we call ED and I policies. Okay, so let's start our discussion now. So we first try and understand who stakeholders are. Let's try and define stakeholders. So a stakeholder can be a person or a group of people. Therefore, a stakeholder is an individual or a group of people who can influence the organization's activities, or who will be influenced by the organization's activities. I hope you got that. A stakeholder is a person who can influence the organization's activities, or who will be influenced by the organization's activities. So stakeholders are 3 types. You have internal stakeholders, stakeholders who are inside the organization. You have connected stakeholders, stakeholders who are outside the organization but connected to the organization. And you have external stakeholders. Now, I want to draw a small diagram here. We will call this a stakeholder map. Let me draw this diagram. So when we look at stakeholders, we broadly classify 3 types of stakeholders. Right? This is called a stakeholder map. You have 3 types of stakeholders. First, we look at internal stakeholders. Internal stakeholders. Then you have connected stakeholders. And then you have external stakeholders. So internal stakeholders are the key players inside the organization, the individuals or groups inside the organization. So you have employees, you have the management, you have unions are important stakeholders. Unions are pretty important, especially if it's a manufacturing large organization. Connected stakeholders are stakeholders who are outside the boundary of the organization, but connected with the organization. So customers, suppliers interact regularly with the organization. Distributors, strategic partners, And then you have shareholders who can either be internal or connected, especially if you're a listed company. You are outside the organization because you bought the shares in the stock market. So then you become a connected shareholder. And if you're the owner of the business, then you become an internal shareholder, right? So they come in the center there. And external stakeholders are the government, the media, pressure groups, and the public. So you have 4 external stakeholders. So this is called a stakeholder map. This is called a stakeholder map. Now, the next step we learn is to understand the different expectations of stakeholders. So as you can see, different stakeholders have different expectations. Customers want product quality, service, and value for money. That's what they seek from the business. But employees will want job security, compensation, and job satisfaction. Shareholders may want dividends, share price appreciation, and for their investment to have a return on investment. The government might want the company as a stakeholder to pay taxes and generate employment. So you can see different stakeholder groups have different expectations. We call this stakeholder expectation analysis. Understanding the entire list of stakeholders and then identify what are their different expectations. Then we learned the next theory on stakeholders is called the Mandela matrix. So the Mandela matrix is a theory that shows how you can prioritize the most important stakeholders. You will prioritize the most important stakeholders. Shall we do it now? So once you plot the stakeholders in the Mandela matrix, it will look something like this. Sometimes you might have stakeholders with high amount of power in the business, high and low power. And then you have also stakeholders that have a high amount of interest in the business. So high power, high interest stakeholders are called key players. Low power, low interest, you manage them with minimal effort because they have a low amount of interest and low amount of power over the business. High and low, keep them happy, keep them satisfied. Low and high, keep them informed, communicate. But these key players, high level of interest, high level of power over the business, those guys must be managed one-to-one. We call that key account management. So you need to dedicate budgets, which mean resources, and you need to understand their expectations because these are the stakeholders who have a high level of interest and high level of power over the business. I hope it's clear. And that is the same thing that is discussed in this diagram. High level of power, high level of interest. Okay, then we will move on to a discussion on key CSR stakeholders. Now, when you talk about corporate social responsibility, the responsibility that the company has towards the environment, we call that corporate social responsibility. So if you really look at it, in terms of the responsibility towards stakeholders, the organization needs to structure itself, organize itself to deliver value to its stakeholders. So when you look at a company, first of all, a key stakeholder in terms of customers, right? You will have current customers and potential customers. That means customers in the future. So current customers, you can engage with your CSR programs. And if you're doing a lot of CSR, goodwill, community projects, societal involvement, you then will have a lot of positive word of mouth and new customers will buy your product. So you can engage different stakeholders with your responsibility marketing through CSR. Then employees, their families, potential employees, current employees can also be motivated with the CSR as well as the responsible practices of the organization. Sometimes research has found that sometimes employees would like to work in companies that are responsible organizations, ethical organizations. Today, one of the biggest challenges is retaining millennials in their jobs. And post-COVID, retaining people in their jobs is a huge challenge to everyone in the world because people have got used to staying at home and they are looking for part-time jobs. They want to all be entrepreneurs. They don't want to work. So companies have a huge challenge, including big companies like Disneyland, car manufacturers who employ so many people, airlines. Today, people want to stay at home and earn money. They don't want to go and work 9 to 5. So one of the things that companies do is engage people, their staff in CSR to show that they are a responsible, ethical organization. Hopefully, the employees will like that and retain with the organization. Then obviously the society, the community can be engaged in CSR activities, your communities, and also the marketplace in terms of competitors or partners. All these people can be engaged. So these are some of the stakeholders that can be engaged in responsible marketing activities or CSR activities. And then we understand this diagram to show that there is at the heart of it, you have to have the responsibility towards your shareholders, your stockholders, the owners of the business. So there are 3 types of responsibilities, guys. Right? That's the subject, responsibility marketing. So you fundamentally have a responsibility as an employee. You have a responsibility towards your shareholders to give them a return, a good return, because they have invested and started the business. So you have to provide them very good returns, profitability. That's your first responsibility. Because if you're not profitable, the company is not sustainable. After you have generated sufficient profits, you have to think about also the wider stakeholder responsibility. That's the second responsibility. So your suppliers, distributors, your employees, your customers. So you can look at all these different stakeholders, and we call that the stakeholder responsibility. And the third type of responsibility that you have is societal responsibility, right? Towards the world, towards the planet we live in, ecological environment, the public, right? So you have a broader social responsibility, societal responsibility. You have then a stakeholder responsibility, and then you have a shareholder profit responsibility. So these are the different types of responsibility, the levels of responsibility that a marketer has. And then we try and understand the micro environment components. In the micro environment, as we discussed in the previous chapter, it is the industry and the players in the industry, customers, suppliers, strategic alliances, strategic partners, distributors. Another word is intermediaries. Competitors can also be there because in some industries, you need to cooperate with your competitors, like in the telco industry, where you need to share your infrastructure, like in the electric vehicle industry, where you need to share your infrastructure, right? So microenvironment consists of the industry, and here are the key stakeholders in that industry. And when we talk about the microenvironment, one theory that should come to your mind is the Porter's five forces. The Porter's five forces. So Michael Porter, the Harvard guru, came up with many management theories. One such theory is the Porter's five forces industry analysis, or to understand the rivalry of an industry, the competitive rivalry of an industry. So this is a tool that we use in the microenvironment. Let me explain this tool to you. Michael Porter said, if you want to understand the competitive rivalry in an industry among the existing competitors, then undertake a five-force analysis. A five-force analysis. What are the five forces? He said, the first force is the threat of new entrants. The threat of new entrants towards the industry. Now let's take an industry. There are some industries that you have a huge threat by new entrants who can easily enter the industry. I'll give you an example. If you take an example like the restaurant business. Restaurant business, you can easily enter the industry. There's no regulation. There's no people controlling. You don't need a lot of investment. Tomorrow, if you want to quit your job and start a restaurant, you can do it with minimal investment. So the threat of new entrants is very high. But if you are to start a TV station or a radio station or a bank, the new entrants cannot enter the banking industry easily because they need a license. The radio or TV industry because they need license, regulatory approval. Therefore, the threat of new entrants are low in that kind of industries. So you need to understand what are the threats of new entrants. Is it high or is it low? It will depend from industry to industry. Then the threat of substitutes. So if you are in an industry, what are the kind of threats that you have from substitute products? You know, every product will have substitutes. This is water. The substitute for this can be Red Bull or Fanta or Coca-Cola or Tambili. Anything else? Any other beverage that you can drink, right? Every product will have a substitute. A substitute. Tea has coffee. If you look at a restaurant, let's say a Chinese restaurant, substitute to a Chinese restaurant can be a Japanese restaurant or a Malaysian food restaurant or a Thai food restaurant, the different cuisines, right? So you need to understand what are the threat of substitutes. Is it high or is it low? So if you take our business, we are a marketing college. As opposed to learning marketing, maybe you can learn IT. IT can be another substitute. HR can be another substitute. Finance can be another substitute. So when you are looking at an industry, you need to understand the threat of substitutes. Is it high or is it low? Then the third factor is the bargaining power of customers. The bargaining power of customers. So the bargaining power of buyers or customers, again, in some industries are high, and in some industries it can be low. I'll give you an example. Now, if you take a company like water board, okay, I had a problem. I had a huge bill from the water board, 30,000 rupee bill. Usually my water bill is about 2,500, 3,000 in my residence. But all of a sudden I had a 30,000 bill. So I called the water board and said, there's something wrong with your meter. Then they came and checked it and they fixed a new meter and they went. So I said, now what's going to happen to the bill? They said, sorry, you are paying. So I said, but how can you prove that I have used? They said, sorry, that's the rule. If the meter has been there, you can't prove that it is defective, then you have to pay it. So I said, sorry, I'm not going to pay it. So I didn't pay it for 2 or 3 months. And then they came to cut my water. And then very soon I had to transfer the money and pay the bill. You know why? Because I didn't have any bargaining power. If they cut my water, then I have to dig a well. I can't do that. So the bargaining power of buyers are not there in some industries, or the bargaining power of buyers are low. Got it? But let's say if I go to the restaurant, if I go to a Chinese restaurant, say Chinese Dragon, to eat food, and when I go to the car park, the security guard doesn't treat me properly. He doesn't allow me to park my car. He doesn't treat me properly. It's okay. I can go. There are so many places in Colombo that I can go and eat Chinese food. So I will go to another place. Therefore, in that industry, the bargaining power of the customer is high. But in some industries, the bargaining power of the customer is low. Now think about different industries. Think about the industry you are a part of. Are the threat of new entrants high or low? Are the threat of substitutes high or low? Is the bargaining power of customer high or low? And the fourth factor is the bargaining power of suppliers. Again, in some industry, the bargaining power of suppliers are very high. Bargaining power of suppliers are very high. Now, if you take an industry like Uber, customers, there are plenty. Suppliers are the riders. Suppliers are the restaurants. Sometimes when it's raining, you can't order on Uber. So you're hungry, but you can't order because there are no suppliers. But there are many customers. So you can see in some industries, there is a huge amount of bargaining power with the suppliers, right? Especially if there are few suppliers and many customers willing to buy. Then there's huge, very high bargaining power of customers, bargaining power of suppliers. Okay. And the fifth factor is the rivalry amongst the existing players. Is it high or is it low? So when you put this into a detailed diagram, it is something like this, right? Threat of new entrants. There are some sub-factors. So you can go through all these factors and then determine, after you go through all these factors scientifically, you will determine whether the threat of new entrants are high or low. High or low. When you go through all these sub-factors, you will determine whether the threat of substitutes in this industry is high or low. Then bargaining power of customers is high or low. Then bargaining power of suppliers, is it high or is it low? And finally, the fifth factor, the rivalry among the existing competitors in the industry, is it high or is it low? So can you see? These are the sub-factors of each force in the Porter's 5 forces. Now, when you come to the next level, you'll be doing a marketing plan. in level 6, and then you will learn this in detail. And here's how you'll see it in the marketing plan. So you will put it in this fashion, where you take each force, you have 5 forces, and then you'll pick the drivers. I have given you the sub factors, and then you'll analyze the implications in the industry, and you'll talk about whether it's a positive impact or a negative impact, or give it a rating, high, medium, or low. So here's how you will present your work and undertake a practical Porter's 5 forces industry analysis audit. Take a good look at this. You don't need to do this at this level, but when you come to level 6, you will take an industry and do a Porter's 5 forces industry analysis audit. Right? So I hope it's clear. So I have given you a note for each force, but let's try and understand the Porter's 5 forces through a sustainability lens, through a responsibility lens. So example, bargaining power of suppliers. Now in the food and beverage industry, the supply chain is exposed to climate change. There's a recycling challenge, water scarcity challenge, which may lead to higher prices by suppliers. Bargaining power of customers. Large retail customers can have a significant bargaining power over suppliers and influence the sustainability characteristics of products they buy. So you can see how each factor, looking through a responsibility or a sustainability lens, can be also analyzed. Although it is part of the microenvironment, the Porter's 5 forces, you still can look at it through a sustainability or a responsible lens. Threat of new entrants. Factories may need environmental certifications. Threat of substitutes. A coffee competitor is a substitute for a tea company, and the tea company may need to increase its sustainability focus over its rival. And finally, the industry, the rivalry amongst existing players. Companies can compete over the sustainability credentials. The sustainability credentials means the kind of credentials you have. Example, what are credentials? Sustainability credentials can be your carbon footprint. It can be what you do in terms of what you support in terms of a cause. It can be any other things like your recycling, which can be measured today. Okay. So what are your sustainability credentials? And that you can use to differentiate amongst your competitors. So you have to study the Porter's 5 forces and then understand the implication from a responsibility or a sustainability lens. Okay, let us now understand the ethical labor practices and its impact towards your employees from an organization. Now, when it comes to responsible marketing, a company needs to make sure that all these issues are taken care of in terms of ethics when it comes to managing labor. So you can see even in the garment industry, you'll have thousands of people in one factory floor. I don't know if you have seen it. I have seen it with my own eyes. And it's a large operation. It's a large operation. A manufacturing operation is a large operation. So companies are increasingly today called to think about ethical labor practices like paying fair wages, providing a safe working environment. There can be fires, if so, fire exits. I know of Sri Lankan companies like MAS that really thinks about its employees, and especially in the factories, because they have thousands of employees. sometimes they also innovate. I know of something that they're doing to improve the productivity. They have oxygen that comes in, extra oxygen that comes in. They put in oxygen through the roof so that the employees can get more oxygen when they work, and they can fully that their productivity goes up when they can breathe more oxygen. So these are things that you need to do as a responsible organization, thinking about your employees. Equal opportunity employment, equal opportunity. There should not be gender discrimination, racial discrimination, age discrimination, and provide comprehensive employee benefits, health insurance, paid leave, retirement plans. Work-life balance is something that is increasingly spoken of. Today, you have a lot of problems with stress, cholesterol, blood pressure. A lot of people are getting heart attacks. They're sometimes dying in office because of the pressure that they have. So work-life balance is something that especially with mothers who are taking care of their young children, they also need a job. The respect for privacy of employees, support mental health and well-being, freedom of speech, and transparent communication. So these are ethical labor practices that an organization should practice. And then you have ethical supply chain practices. You may have a lot of suppliers. You may also have a lot of bargaining power over your suppliers. But your ethical stance, how you ethically manage your suppliers, will also be important. Because if you don't do that, no sooner your suppliers are given a better price, they might switch and go to your competitor. So fair labor standards, even with your suppliers, sustainable sourcing, transparency, and traceability. Sometimes you must be able to trace your raw materials all the way to the field. Supplier audits and assessment to see whether they are complying to standards. Because sometimes you as an organization, MAS as an organization can be responsible. MAS as an organization can practice responsibility in their factory, but they might be buying buttons from some Chinese company in China, in Guangzhou or some other place, where that organization is selling buttons to you, but they are not responsible. So you need to then conduct supplier audits and assessments. You need to have a diversity and inclusion policy. Diversity and inclusion policy, so that it's very clear and transparent to everyone in terms of what the organization is looking for from their suppliers. You also need to have an understanding of how your suppliers are managing their recycling. Are they complying with regulations, tax policies, and community engagement? So you can think about ethics that will affect the organization's labor practices. And then there are ideas to improve ethicals or the ethics of the supply chain, ethics of the supply chain. And one of the policies that we use here, guys, is called the ED&I policy. ED&I policy. What does it stand for? You need to study this. Equality, diversity, and inclusion policy. Equality, diversity, and inclusion policy. So equality is when you treat everyone fairly. You can't favor anyone. You can't favor females. You can't favor males. You can't favor people who are speaking English over people who aren't. You can't do that. You have to treat everyone fairly, recognizing that everyone has individual needs and the right to have those needs respected equality. Diversity. Diversity is to encourage diversity. Sometimes you may have people of different color, black, white, dark, brown. You might have people of different age categories. You might have LGBTQ. So you need to encourage and embrace diversity, the unique characteristics, perspectives of life, experiences that define us as individuals, which should be valued and appreciated. And that diversity is something that you need to respect. And finally, inclusion is removing barriers to engagement and creating a sense of belonging. Inclusion, acknowledging people's differences and treating everyone with respect. So we conclude our discussion here on assessment criteria 1.2. I will see you in AC 1.3.